Alright guys, we are here to take you through a squat sequence that I use on a regular basis and that we use at Power Monkey Camp during our squat session that we go through. And this is a really good general warm-up for just preparation for the Olympic lifts or preparation to do squats for the Olympic lifts. So keep in mind that when we're squatting for the Olympic lifts, we're trying to mimic the receiving position or prepare for the receiving position for the snatch and clean as much as possible. So we need to be in as deep of a position as we can get into. Obviously we want that to be quality, and as upright of a position as that we can get into, because when we have a bar overhead or in a front rack position, we need to be upright to support that weight. So this warm-up is all about preparing you for the best position that you can get into on that day, and also preparing you in the long run if you need to make some good or some major mobility changes. But being a general warm-up, that means that it's good for somebody that already has a really good squat. Maybe your mobility is already really good and your squat has no issues, or if you really struggle with the squat. So it's going to be good for both sides of the coin there, and everyone in between. It's one that I use again for my athletes all the time, but even for myself every time I work out. Actually, no matter what I'm doing, I do this warm-up. Okay, so the first part of this warm-up is just going to be an air squat. Okay, what I'm going to do at the air squat is I'm going to use these plates to elevate my heels. And notice that let me go to the no shoes here. Notice that I don't have any shoes on. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I think it's a good general rule for anyone to warm up without their shoes on, specifically for the squat. In comparison to weightlifting shoes, it's going to be harder for you to perform that full range of motion squat. But since it's typically, for most people, you're going to struggle with the quality, that's why we're going to elevate, and that's why we're going to not use a lot of weight. And put you in positions where you're perfectly safe. You don't have to worry too much about it. But I'm going to wear no shoes. First exercise is going to be the air squat. I'm going to elevate my heels. I'm using a 5 kilo plate that's comparable to a 10-pound plate. You can also use something as much as like a 15-pound bumper plate that's a little bit thicker than this, especially if you struggle. What I want to pay attention to first is that my feet are in a good quality position in regards to best transfer over to, again, the receiving position of the snatch and the clean. So if you're used to squatting like this, or let's say if you have to squat with your feet really wide and really turned out, and that's just where your mobility is, while you've got this cheat here, go ahead and put your feet in a better position. And better position to me for the Olympic lifts, I would say, is about shoulder width apart with toes slightly turned out or slightly outside of that. Okay, so while you've got this cheat, go ahead and try to start working towards a better foot position. Otherwise, if you continue to work this position and you get strong here, then that's what you're going to reinforce for the receiving position of your snatch and clean. So keep that in mind. We're always trying to make your position better and improve your overall mobility. Okay, so while I've got this elevation, I'm going to drop down to that deep position. Again, with this elevation, you should have immediately higher quality and fuller range of motion than you normally do. But I'm going to hold this bottom position for about 5 seconds on each rep.
I don't know if I put anything on my phone or not.
And I won't do all 5, but during the regular squat sequence, we're going to do 5 to 10 reps. All right. The pause in the bottom is very important because that gives you time in that bottom position to, one, help you stretch a little bit, help you warm up, and help create awareness of that bottom position. Okay. As we move forward into other squat variations, we're going to use things that's going to help your quality even more. So first, we use the elevation. That still may not be enough to create the quality that we want. So you might need some sort of weight to offset you a little bit to make that happen. If you struggle with the air squat with no elevation, for example, and your quality is not there, then honestly you probably want to stay away from that, from doing too many reps there. Does that make sense? Because you're moving through a compromised positions rep after rep after rep. So that's why we're going to show you some other exercises or other variations of the squat that you can help that with. Now, Dave here is going to show you some warm-ups that we do between our squat variations. So we've got the first air squat with elevation, and then we're going to go to a general warm-up that Dave is going to show us. Now keep in mind, this is considered mobility, but it's moving mobility. Okay, so that moving mobility means that we're not going to hold it, that we're not going to do a static hold. Typically we like to stay away from long static holds while we're warming up or before we're going to be lifting heavier, performing, doing anything. So this moving mobility is what we're going to use for warm-ups between our squat variation sets.
Yeah, so the biggest thing we're trying to do here, I guess, from the movement prep or the physical therapy side of things is, along with working the pattern itself, we're trying to warm up each individual joint that's going to be involved in the squat. So when we squat, we have the ankle joint, the knee joint has to go full flexion, the hip joint has to move, and the core has to be, you know, positioned well and be kind of moving with the squat itself. So we're going to start from the bottom up and do one drill as we kind of do a squat variation to, one, and help enhance the next step of the squat, but two, to like Chad said, whether you have a great mobility and you don't need to work on it a ton, or you have, you're struggling a little bit, you want to always prep the range of motion that you have before you start to actually squat. So the first one we're going to do is going to be an ankle dorsiflexion drill. We're going to come right over to the edge of here. And what Chad's going to do is we're going to put one foot in front, and the biggest thing we're looking for is that when we come forward in our knee, the things we don't want to see, we don't want to see the foot collapse in this way, we don't want to see the knee cave in, and we don't want to see the heel pop up off the floor too much. Because what we're trying to do is enhance the amount of motion we have out to the side to get full engagement of our ankle dorsiflexion this way, right? So theoretically, if you're at a wall here or something, you'd like to be about 4 inches away from the wall and be able to tap that. And that just correlates to a pretty good amount of dorsiflexion in that foot. So what we do is 10 reps, and as he pulls, he's not just kind of crushing and jamming his ankle down this way, he's kind of using his shin muscles, he's using his toe muscles to pull himself fully as far as he can go, and he's holding there for a second. And we really want people to be active in their stretches. We want people to really try to work on getting full range of motion, but also really push the end, in control, instead of just kind of, wailing away on just the flexibility part of it. We think this transfers over a lot better to the actual squatting warm-up and the lifts themselves. So just 10 reps of those on each feet in between the first squat.
All right. The next variation of the squat that we're going to do, I call this a support squat hold. So what that means is I'm going to get next to some sort of upright. I'll use the stand here. Before I go down, keep in mind I'm going to be using this to help myself, to help hold myself up in a better position and to be able to sink lower, again with better quality. I'm going to make sure that I've got my feet, for most people, in an exaggerated foot position. And what that means, again, I talked about it earlier, if your feet are normally out here, let's go ahead and start heading into that, what we're going to call that better transfer to the Olympic lifts, about shoulder width apart or slightly outside, with the toes only slightly turned out. Only slightly turned out means about 5 degrees. If you can get to where you're doing elevated heel during your warm-up in this support squat with your toes even straight ahead or even slightly in, it's not going to hurt you. It's a warm-up, and it's a good exaggeration for you to, again, take into your regular squats or your regular Olympic lifting, okay? So while I'm holding this position, I'm going to make sure my feet are at that width, and I'm going to go ahead and exaggerate my toes in just slightly. And what I'm going to do is, again, use this to help allow myself to sink down and to maintain a tighter quality position. I'm going to reach high here for about 15 seconds and just try to sink down lower and lower, keeping my knees out sufficiently, right? And then I'm going to reach as low as I can. Again, I'm saying reach because I want you reaching high. I don't want you holding on like this. And I'm reaching low and now pulling my hips to the bar. And I'm going to hold that for about 15 seconds. All right? After that, we'll take you into another stretch, another warm-up.
Yep. So moving up from the ankle, the next thing we're going to really try to prep is going to be like the knee, the hamstring, the posterior chain, and then eventually into the hip joint. Sometimes we see people who have excessively stiff, posterior chain, tone, so hamstrings, and even honestly some of the inner adductors that serve as also power out of the bottom. If those things become very stiff, it may limit your ability to comfortably sit down. So instead of kind of just jumping right into your squats, you want to also involve some of the tissue all the way back up. And the one that we really like for this is called a leg lower. So what we're going to have Chad do is he's going to lay on his back. And typically people just go right to like a static hamstring stretch, and although that may help to reduce some of the stiffness, it doesn't really involve the active pattern. And so we're trying to integrate the hamstring itself into the core's ability to help kind of control that. So what Chad's going to do is he's going to start with his leg up here. Obviously Chad's pretty mobile, but some people who are a little bit tighter, they might move a little bit farther back here. The biggest thing we want to see is we don't want to see you scooch in at the sacrifice of bending your knee, right? So if you scooch forward and you have this big bend, we're kind of skipping what we're trying to get at. So only go as far as you can with a comfortable knee bend here. And what Chad's going to do is he's going to bring the other leg up to meet it, and he's gonna go all the way up, and as he goes down, he's gonna slowly lower, and the biggest thing is once we get to the limit of our hamstring on this side, we're just gonna stop there, because if we really push farther, we might get some bending or some cheating. So he just holds for 1 second, and then slowly brings his leg all the way back up. And he's gonna go through 10 reps of those. And sometimes it's very good because people can move themselves in and out as they see fit. They can also feel like maybe between a few first reps or second sets, they get a little bit farther, and they can slowly kind of work their way in, but they have a really good objective way to know how close they are to their hamstring limit. So we like this one a little bit more as opposed to just doing more of a static stretch. 10 of those.
Yep, and a couple things that I just want to reconfirm. I want to say it again because this happens all the time, even with people that I'm coaching on a regular basis, that knee bend. Flex your quad if you need to make sure that that leg stays straight. I think it's also good to put your toe in at least a somewhat of a pointed position on both sides, and then flex this quad as well to make sure that those legs stay straight. We don't all the time I see people just repping away like this, and they're getting more and more range of motion, but it's because they're bending their knee. And keep in mind, hamstrings, I want to reconfirm as well, are very important because they can cause you to lack range of motion and or completely round and fold in the bottom of your squat. So warming those up and getting those headed in the right direction is very important. Next variation of the squat that we're going to go to, we're going to go back to the elevated heel. But as I said, we're going to add a little bit of something to this to, again, for most people, this is going to help their quality. For anyone that your squat's already good, this is just something that you can use, again, to warm up and kind of reinforce your position. Call it an extended arm plate squat. So when you hold this plate out here, one, make sure that your elbows stay locked, and I like to have people look straight ahead, and then this hole is in line with your eyes, and that's where you're going to keep it the whole time. Slowly drop down to that bottom position, and again hold it for 5 seconds. And again, we're going to do 5 to 10 reps there. Yeah, if you do 10 reps, it's going to get pretty hard to hold that plate out there. So drop it down and rest your arms if you need to. Another thing that I like to add in on this, depending on the athlete and what we're working on, is when we come up, we can go ahead and start warming up that overhead position as well by just stretching up and back. And that'll take a little bit of pressure off your shoulders holding in that position. And there, we just want to make sure that your body is staying tight and in good alignment. We don't want to see this here, but you're staying tight there. Just another extra step that you can add in there. And then after that, we'll go to another.
Yep. So moving up from the knee and the hamstring is the hip. So hip is super important in the squat, obviously, and there's a few things that it needs to do well in order to have a good squat. So one of the things that needs to happen is it needs to be able to flex fully up to your chest, but it also needs to rotate in different degrees as you're above that 90-degree angle, right? So commonly we see a lot of people who are working on their hip rotation and their knees are down below, and it's not really warming up the full depth of their squat. So this one I'll show because I want to see a couple compensations that come up. So a windshield wiper is one we really like, right? So if I sit up like this, and the first thing I do is I'm stretching my leg really out far, well, this isn't really correlating to a squat pattern, right? This is more of a quarter squat. So what we want to do is sit up nice and tall and try to make sure we're up here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna actively pull our knee into hip internal rotation just 5 times. And the biggest thing here is I'm not just, pushing my leg as hard as I can. I'm actively trying to pull through the range of motion. And when I feel like I'm stuck or I feel a stretch here, which is what we're looking for, you can hold, and then maybe you can put a little bit of extra help on from the other side, right? The biggest compensation or error we see is that people will turn their foot out and they'll kind of just torque the inside of their knee, and sometimes your MCL can get a little cranky. So what you want to make sure is that your toe is in line with your kneecap as you do this, right? So if I turn my foot in and I get this, these are not in a line, and I might be putting stress here. So keep yourself in a good alignment and just 5 pulling down to where you feel like it's comfortable. And then again, you can get a little extra pressure here, trying to make sure that you're still upright and you're keeping your core engaged. We're not tucking underneath like this. So just 5 actively on each side with a little bit of pressure on each is pretty good.
Good. All right, and then to go in line with this specific squat sequence that we're talking about, and keep in mind that you can come up with your own squat sequence, and this is, we're using general mobility warm-ups, but if you find that your ankles are very tight and they're your biggest issue, then you might just do the ankle stretch between every single squat variation, all right? But what we would do next is go back to the support squat hold that I showed you a couple variations ago. I won't go through that again, but during this squat sequence, that's where that would fit in. And then we would go to our last piece of mobility here.
Yep, so that one on the ground is more for hip internal rotation and hip flexion. We also want to make sure that we prep some hip flexion and a little bit of external rotation as well. So a lot of times people have stiffness in the back of their hip joint, so the posterior capsule or some of their glute tissue. And the one that we really like for this is to go hands and knees. And what we want to do is we want to make sure first and foremost that we're not going to move our back away from a not flat position. So pretend you got a glass of water here filled to the brim, you don't want to spill that out. If I go to stretch my hip and I round as much as I can, well, I'm not really stretching my hip anymore, I'm just kind of sacrificing motion here. And obviously for the squat with good quality, we want to see a more neutral spine position. So keep that as a priority. First thing we're going to do is we're going to straighten one leg back, right? We're going to turn our foot here into external rotation, and then we're going to kind of pin down, right? So in this situation, I'm actually stretching my right hip. So I'll switch it around so you can see. So straighten back, slight here, and I'm going to pin it down. And notice that I haven't really moved from this position. So I'm in a little external rotation and my hip is flexed like I would to squat. And from here, I'm not really going to do too much. I'm just going to shift my body weight to the side, and then I'm going to sit back, right? And what this does is it takes up some slack in my hip capsule and also some of the tissue behind my glute right here. So just rocking sideways and then sitting back this way, and you should feel pretty much all stretch here, right? You should never feel any pinching type sensation on the inside of your hip. If you are, try to play with your position a little bit, or just don't push as much and kind of try to rock more sideways than sitting back at all. So we go here. To progress this a little bit, you can have somebody drop their elbow down and get a little bit more of a stretch. And usually once we get to this position, we just sit here and we take a couple deep breaths on each side. And again, I'm moving myself actively into it. I'm not just, pushing back and cranking my hip joint as much as I can. So we'd go about 5 deep breaths on each side for that one.
Good. All right, and the last squat variation is going to be with the plate again, but now we're going to move the plates that we're elevating with out of the way and try to do this on the level surface again with no shoes. After you've gone through this sequence and you do this last variation, you put those weightlifting shoes on, I promise you're going to feel much better. Now with this one, since you don't have elevation, if you need to widen back out a little bit, maybe turn your toes out a little bit more to maintain as much quality as you can, that's okay. But keep in mind, you've gone through all this warm-up, and especially if you've individualized your mobility between the sets, you should have a better chance to keep your feet in at least a little bit of a better position. All right, so always, again, we're doing a warm-up, you've got this plate to help you, always work towards a better foot position if you're struggling there. All right, so same thing here. The hole is at eye level, straight ahead, sinking down to that bottom position, holding for about 5 seconds on each rep. Come up, and again, you can throw that overhead stretch in if you want, especially if you're doing anything overhead, which most likely you are warming up for that as well. A couple things I want you to keep in mind is that don't let these aids, these different squat variations, the support of the upright, the elevation, and the plate out front, to allow you to be lazy. You still need to work very hard to maintain core tension. And core tension means that like you said, your back is flat, your back is tight, and we're going to lock our back in by staying tighter more in the front here. The quickest explanation that I can give you for that is if you'll pretend that someone's going to punch you in the bottom of the stomach, how would you tighten up? So you're going to have to work hard and pay attention to that, especially if you're someone that is always rounding in the bottom. You may be somebody that can just drop down and you don't have to think about it, and that's great. But if you are someone that's always rounding and your quality isn't there, you're going to have to continually work hard here. We don't just want you going down in this hold and you're completely folded. We don't want that, and we don't want you doing that on any of these other variations as well. We'll be doing another video where we talk more about kind of those things in more detail, but for now, make sure that you're working hard here and that you're working hard sinking to that low position. The more you can individualize your mobility between those variations, the better. And other than that, we're good to go.
That's good.